By the age of 30, you seemingly have it all. You graduate from Stanford, one of the best universities in the country. You land a job at a private equity firm managing billions of dollars. So let's set the stage here. How much money are you taking home at this point in your life?
I was a vice president at the fund, and I feel like cash comp for like vice president roles at that size of fund is probably in the like, I don't know, 500K-ish a year.
500K. So
yeah, I mean, you're making more than that if you take into account like carried interest and how you're getting profit share in the funds.
Let's just go with 500K because that's
a lot. Yeah,
that's an insane amount of money, and I'm sure so many people that are listening or watching this right now would do a lot of things to be paid $500,000 a year. But for you, that was something that you just ended up throwing away and saying, I'm going to quit my job and move across the country and leave this life behind. So take us back to the moment you made that life-changing decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context that's important around that decision is my whole life I had operated under the same assumption that you're saying other people would have around that number, which is to say like 500K, like my life will be perfect. Everything will be great. You know, look, when I had no money, when I was graduating school and I was going to go get my first job, and I think my first salary was like $70,000 a year. I remember thinking like, 100K a year, I'm going to be set. Everything's great. My life is going to be awesome. 200K a year, I can't even imagine. 500K a year, I can afford anything in the world. Like there's absolutely nothing. I'm going to be perfectly happy. And you build those things up in your mind. It's called the arrival fallacy. All of those things you prop up as this destination or achievement that you're going to get to, and you're going to feel like you've arrived. And it's a fallacy because what happens is you get the thing, and then your mind immediately resets to the next thing. And you're not happy, and you don't have the contentment or fulfillment. You've just propped it up in your mind that way. And I experienced that on several occasions. And at every stage along the way, I reset. And unfortunately, while I was achieving in this one area of my life, which was making money, every other area of my life was starting to suffer. And I was hiding a lot from the world along that journey. I mean, I was suffering in my relationships. You know, my parents, I wasn't seeing them ever, maybe once a year at that point. My sister and my relationship had basically ground to a halt. My wife and I were struggling to conceive at the time, which was creating real strain. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. I wasn't sleeping enough. I mean, I was really not doing great in a lot of areas of life. While on the surface, you would have said I was winning the game, right? You've been like, oh, this guy's crushing it. And I started to have a sensation that year, that was late 2020, early 2021, that if that was what winning the game felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. And it all came to a head for me in one moment in May of 2021. I went out for a drink with an old friend. We sat down and he asked how I was doing. And I told him that it had started to get tough being as far away from my parents as I was. We were 3,000 miles away. They're starting to get older, starting to see chinks in the armor, if you will, with their health. And he asked how old they were. I said mid-60s. He asked, how often do you see them? I said about once a year. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die.
Damn. Wow.
And I just remember feeling like I'd been punched in the gut.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that the amount of time you have left with the people you care about most in the world is that finite and countable, that you can put it onto a few hands. It just shook me to the core. And in that moment, I realized that if something didn't change, I was going to end up in a place where I didn't want to be. And so the next day, my wife and I had a candid conversation, and within 45 days, I had left that job. We'd sold our house in California, and we'd moved 3,000 miles to be back closer to our families. And that turning point, that inflection point, that decision to like grab life, take control over these things that you have previously just defaulted into, was the start of this entire journey to where I am today.
So you make this decision, you move to New York, and then what? Do you get another job in private equity here?
Yeah, my operating assumption when I initially thought I was going to leave was I'm just going to do the same thing, but on the East Coast. And so I started, basically like my mental model for life is that your natural state is to default into your patterns that you have. These like paths that you've been convinced of or indoctrinated into. And I think for most of us, that default state is money is the pathway to success and happiness. Sure. I hadn't put together in my mind at this point, by the way, that my narrow focus on money was actually what was leading me off that cliff. I thought it was more like, I'm just so far away from family. Let me fix that one issue, and then everything else will be better. I hadn't put together the fact that there was this much broader systemic problem that was happening. And so my original assumption was like, I think I can just go get a job working in finance, but on the East Coast, closer. And when I went and spoke to a few different mentors, started having conversations about that change, one of the things that came up consistently was like, you don't need to just continue down this path. You can actually do something totally different.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had been writing and starting to create some content. It had been about a year. I'd been writing on Twitter, and I had just about started a newsletter. And it had started to get some traction. Like, it was clear that I had carved out a little bit of a voice, that there was something that people were resonating with. And I had one mentor in particular, plus my wife, who just said, like, can you do this thing you've been doing on the weekends as like a little side hobby? Can't you do that full time? Isn't that like a thing? And I had just never thought about it until that moment. And so it was really like late May, early June of 2021 that I just decided to burn the boats. And we moved. Whole life is changing. I had built up this nest egg from working for 7 years. I was like, if this ends up being a 2-year MBA and everything fails, I can go get another job in finance on the back end of that. But let me go all in on this for now.
Yeah. In page 7 of your book, I want to double click on this because you talked about it, about the arrival fallacy. And this got me real deep because I related to it so much. How many times has the thing your younger self dreamed of become the thing you complain about once you've gotten it? The house you long for becomes the house you grumble is too small. The car you obsessed over becomes a car you can't wait to trade in. The engagement ring that made your eyes sparkle becomes the ring you need to upgrade because of its imperfections. Worse yet, the incessant quest for more had blinded me to the great beauty of what I had right in front of me. That is really beautiful, man. This
is a part of human nature that it's called hedonic adaptation. Like, we reset to a baseline after positive or negative events. And it is evolutionarily quite helpful because it makes sure that you don't get too high. Right? Like, you have a good event happen, and in the wild, if you got too excited and you kind of just like let your guard down for too long, there might have been a lion lurking that was going to eat you. But in our modern world, it is not particularly helpful because what it does is it keeps you on this treadmill chasing the thing that you can measure, which is money. And at every turn, you make your happiness conditional on some outcome. You tell yourself, when I get X, then I'll be happy. And that X just keeps shifting. And we have science around this. Michael Norton, this Harvard Business School professor, went and asked a bunch of high net worth individuals, people worth anywhere from $1 million on through 100 million plus, how happy they were on a scale of 1 to 10. And then he asked, how much more money would you need to be at a 10? Across the board, whether they were worth $1 million or 100 million, everyone said 2 to 3 times as much.
Wow.
It makes no sense. It's just a human brain is totally fundamentally broken in this regard. And so this is what happens, is that the things that you prayed for become the things that you complain about. I still catch myself doing it, even though I know this lesson. Recently, I have a 2.5-year-old little boy. I was in my office 2 weeks ago working on something really important. I was focusing on it. Son comes busting through into my office, starts like terrorizing my office, throwing things on the ground, like jumping around on the couch, doing all these things. And I started having this like train of thought in my mind, getting so annoyed. Like, why is he doing this? Doesn't he know that I'm trying to work on something? This is so annoying. And in that moment, I snapped myself back to 4 years ago when my wife and I were struggling to conceive. And I prayed every single night that one day we would have a healthy kid. And here I was in this moment complaining about the exact thing that I'd prayed for. And so it was a reminder that sometimes the things that you pray for end up being the things that you complain about unless you pause and you catch yourself in those moments. And we all need to do that a little bit more. We need to make sure that we're appreciating these things that we have. We need to make sure that we're appreciating enough rather than just chasing whatever more we've propped up in our minds.
Yeah. That's so
That story gave me the chills. It's really beautiful. I completely agree that money is not everything, but I do want to play devil's advocate here for a second, because we were doing some research for this episode, and you know how the internet is, and you know how comments can be on the internet. But we did find one on one of your other podcast appearances a few years ago that we thought was pretty interesting. So this person says, "This guy seems really smart. The only thing I dislike is when rich people talk about how much money is not everything. That's like me telling a homeless person that a house is overrated." What do you say in response to something like that?
I think that's totally correct. And I explicitly do not say that money doesn't matter. The book is called The 5 Types of Wealth. Financial wealth is one of those 5. And at the very beginning of the book, I have a line in there that says, money isn't nothing. It simply can't be the only thing. I think that financial wealth is really important. I mean, money, definitively, all the science shows this. Money buys happiness in the early days. Like in the early part of the income curve, money directly buys happiness because it reduces fundamental burdens and stresses. It allows you to have shelter. It allows you to have food. It allows you to take care of people you love. It allows you to create experiences that you love. But the point is that it can't be the only thing. It can't be the one thing that you focus on for your entire life, because what you will find if it's the only thing is that you'll wake up when you're 50 and you'll have a whole bunch of money and you'll have 4 kids that don't talk to you and you'll have 3 wives that you're divorced from. And that's not a game that anyone wants to win. And unfortunately, that's the path that a lot of people are marching down. And the way that happens is when it's the only thing you measure in your life. It's the only scoreboard that you have. It is a part of a scoreboard for living a life that is great. I completely agree with that. And there's principles in the book for helping you build financial wealth. And there's a season of your life when that is really important. Actually, like in your 20s and early 30s, great time to focus on building financial wealth and to have that be a core focus and a core priority. But if you lose sight of everything else on the journey, I can guarantee you'll end up miserable. No one has ever really ended up miserable by prioritizing relationships, by prioritizing health, by prioritizing their purpose. You might not make as much money, but you won't be miserable. A lot of people end up miserable prioritizing money.
I relate to that so much because similar to you, when I was in college, I remember having this exact conversation with my buddy. So our older brother is an accountant, works for PwC, and I found out that if you make partner at one of these big 4 accounting firms, your salary is $1 million a year. And I remember turning to my buddy and I'm just like, I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to go work at the big 4. I'm going to work my ass off for 15, whatever, 20 years, whatever it takes to become partner and make that $1 million, because I know that if I'll sacrifice everything. If I make that $1 million, I'm going to be happy then. And that now, where I am today as a 32-year-old looking back on my 18-year-old self, like I realize, thank God I didn't go down that path, because I did, but then I
became an accountant as a dyslexic.
I did go down that path, but thank God I got off that path, because I got to see, similar to what you're saying here in the 5 types of wealth, that your finances are a piece of the puzzle. Right? There's more to it.
It's one battle in a much bigger war.
I love how you use the book to really redefine how we measure wealth. And I love how you start the book with this diagnostic tool where you basically throw away net worth as the way to measure wealth because, like you said, it's very limited. You can have $1 million but still feel broke. And you created this wealth score quiz. So basically you're asking a bunch of questions in the 5 different types of wealth. Can you just quickly touch on what are the 5 types of wealth?
Time wealth is the first one. This is all about freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, where you spend it, when you trade it for other things. It's about an awareness of time as your most precious asset. Social wealth is the second. It is all about your relationships. People, those few core deep relationships, and then an extension to the breadth of relationships that go beyond the self. Mental wealth is the third. This is all about purpose. It's about growth. It's about creating the space necessary in your life to engage with some of the bigger unanswerable questions, whether through spirituality and religion, through meditation, through solitude. Physical wealth is the fourth. This is all about your health and vitality. It's about taking the controllable actions to fight this natural decay and atrophy that your body is going to go through with aging. And then the fifth type is financial wealth. And that is about your net worth, with the specific caveat of really understanding what enough means to you, with the recognition that your expectations are your single greatest financial liability. Because if your expectations rise faster than your assets, you will never feel rich.
Yeah. I love that you put this in the book for people to actually do something with, because we're a big believer in there's not a silver bullet. There's not one thing for everyone. And this gets people to actually practice self-awareness, right? To look at their own lives, see where there might be some gaps that they need to fill in. And the rest of your book is like a buffet of options to dive into to fill in what you really need to focus on. And it's really practical, and we're not just having brain sex with these ideas in your book. Like, you really want people to take action on these ideas, and that's something that we really appreciated.
Yeah, I like that. I like the articulation of a buffet. I might steal that. I really tried to write a different book, in the sense that my biggest argument against self-help or self-improvement books tends to be that it's a lot of dopamine from information gathering and not a lot of dopamine from action. Mm-hmm. And people read the book and they get the dopamine from that, not from actually going and doing anything about it. And dopamine from information gathering is a pretty dangerous drug, because it convinces you that you just did something when the reality is you didn't do anything. And so I tried to really make sure that in every area of the book, there were real actions you could start on today.
I would love to actually take a deeper dive on 3 of our favorite actionable frameworks and ideas with you, and double click on them together. Does that sound cool?
Let's do it.
All right. So this first framework literally changed my entire life personally. It's the framework of finding your enough. And you include a quote from a 46-year-old barber, which I loved. And he says, "I can pay my bills and take my girls on 2 vacations a year. If you ask me, I'm a rich man." I love this concept.
My barber. He's going to be at the event, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I got him tickets for him and his daughter.
Amazing.
I told him he's in it. I was like, I didn't put your name in, but yeah, it was the best when he said that. I was in the middle of writing the book and he said it, and I was like, dude, that's going in the book.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's the best. Yeah, enough. I have this line in the beginning of the book: never let the quest for more distract you from the beauty of enough. And I think that really captures a lot of the heart of this entire idea of the book. We all really struggle with living in that enough life, understanding what it looks like, because we default to these numbers. So we say, like, oh, when I have $10 million, then I'll have enough. But you don't know what that means. You don't really know what that life looks like. Like, what am I doing? Where am I? How am I living? It doesn't need to be Spartan either. Like, my version of enough could be having 2 houses. It could be getting to travel a bunch because I want to create experiences with people I love. But it needs to be tangible. You need to actually understand what you are doing and how you feel in that, so that it no longer becomes this like melting away mirage off in the distance. You know, there's this story that I absolutely love, the investment banker and the fisherman, which is probably the best articulation of enough that I have seen. This investment banker goes to this Mexican fishing village and walking on the docks, and he comes across this fisherman who has a few fish in his boat. And the banker asks, "How long did it take you to catch those fish?" The fisherman says, "Only a little while." The banker's like, "Why didn't you fish for longer?" The fisherman says, "Well, I have everything I need. I fish for a little while in the morning, then I go home, I have lunch with my wife, take a nap, and then I go into town and drink wine and laugh and play music with my friends." And the banker's like, "You got this all wrong. You got to fish for longer so you can catch more fish. Then you use the profits to buy a second boat. Then you use those profits to buy a third boat, create a big fishing boat enterprise. You move to the big city, you take the company public, and you'll make millions." The fisherman's like, "And then what?" And the banker says, "And then what? Then you can retire to a small fishing village. You can fish for a little while in the morning. You can have lunch with your wife, take a nap, go into town, drink wine, play music, and laugh with your friends.
It's classic.
And the fisherman looks at him and smiles and just walks off. And the most common interpretation of that story is that the banker is wrong and the fisherman is right. And I actually disagree with that. I really think it is about the two of them have fundamentally different versions of what it means to have enough. And they have very different priorities. The banker may think that building something big and meaningful, creating jobs, doing things that way is his version of what it looks like to have enough, to build something meaningful. The fisherman is already living his enough life. Yeah. He is living his best life that he wants. And for the two of them to take their map and try to apply it to the other person's terrain is fundamentally it's fundamentally incorrect. And unfortunately, we live in a world where everyone is trying to apply their map to your terrain. You go on social media, right? Like Brian Johnson is this guy that's trying to live forever. You're posting all this content about his life. The most common critique that you can find of people when they get mad at Brian is like, he's not living, he's optimizing, all these things. I've spent time with Brian. That guy is living his best life. He is so happy and finds so much purpose in the things that he's doing. Is it my version? No, absolutely not. I wouldn't want to do that. Is it yours? Probably not. But it is his. So us applying our map to his terrain makes no sense because he's living his version of what it looks like to have enough. His purpose, he's grounded in the things he truly cares about. That is what this is all about. It is about identifying the things that truly matter to you and then going and building your life around them.
I actually stopped at this part in the book when I read it and took time to actually sit with the question of what does enough really look like for me? Because in my mind, I realized I've always said I want to be really wealthy. I want to have this beautiful home. I want to, be able to give those cool experiences to my family and friends. But I never really sat down and got very granular about how much money all of those things would actually cost and what they really looked like. So I sat down and I really focused on the three main expenses, which for me would be my home, my dream car, and then dream experiences. And I actually found a home that I figured would be my absolute dream home where I wouldn't want any more than that. On Zillow, got the exact price, got the monthly price, did the same thing with the dream car, did the same thing with dream experiences, and got an actual tangible number. And what I realized from doing that experience was it was so much less than I actually thought that it was. And it gave me, I'm a certainty freak. I'm one of those. And for me, having that number was just so awesome to know, all right, I know where I'm going. I know what my enough truly is. And I got super excited about it. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did that exercise. And look, I think making these things tangible is the key. It's what does it actually look like for you? When we moved to the East Coast, we were getting this new house on the East Coast. The house that we were getting, I was I live in this the rest of my life. I've got a pool in the backyard where I can take my son, which, by the way, for me, that's my wealthy life. Being able to take my son in the pool at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. If I can do that, I'm the wealthiest man alive. Yeah. I don't need a mansion. I don't need, 10 houses. I don't need to be able to fly on private jets. I want a son who wants to spend time with me and to be healthy enough to take him in the pool and do that, spend time with him. And I still feel that way. And my wife and I say it all the time, is there's all of this focus externally on building this big life. You're oh, I need to do all these things, post it on Instagram, do all these, everyone is pressuring you to that. And there's so much beauty in just appreciating the little things and what you can actually create, those little boring moments.
Yeah.
That's really where life is lived too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the exercise Mike did was a really powerful one for him because he loves being very goal oriented. So I want to shift this a little bit and talk about goals. The second big idea we want to talk about that we really liked was how we can actually accomplish those goals by using what you call high leverage systems. And in the book, you quote James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, who says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." So tell us, why are high leverage systems the key to achieving our goals?
So James Clear made the idea of systems really popular via Atomic Habits, which has sold tens of millions of copies at this point. The whole idea with a system is it's the actual daily operationalization that allows you to achieve your goals. It's what you are actually doing on a daily basis to go and kind of walk towards whatever summit you're trying to reach. And high leverage, just as a definition, implies something where you were putting in a unit of input to create potentially 10, 100, 1,000 units of output. A normal system would be one-to-one, and what you are trying to do is say, let me put in place the systems where my 1 unit of effort is going to create a whole lot more than that in the output. What that means is that you can be a lot more strategic about where you are deploying your time and energy. Because if I'm generating way more output on the same unit of input,
you can have that time to go in the pool with your son at 1 p.m.
Exactly. You get to be a time maker rather than a time taker. You can go and pick and choose. And that really is a fundamental principle of the whole book, because the point that I try to make is traditional wisdom on this idea of these different areas of your life says that everything exists on an on-off switch. There's this idea of like the 4 burners theory, that basically like you can only have one burner fully on at once and all the others turned off. And I just disagree with that for a couple of reasons. One, I just think it's not true. I think you can have it all at once. I don't think you can perfectly optimize everything all at once, but you can have it all on. And 2, if you turn some of these areas off, you can't turn them back on. The burner's off. If you don't do anything for your physical health between now and age 50, you ain't getting it back. If you don't invest in your relationships in any way, those people won't be there for you later. Your kids won't be 5 years old later. Your wife won't be there for you. Your friends won't be there for you. So you can't turn these areas off. All of these areas in life exist on a dimmer switch. And just because you are focused on one and have it turned up doesn't mean the other areas have to be off. You can turn them down. And the important point is when something is turned down, you just need to do the tiny action that is high leverage. The one little thing that it actually creates a whole lot more significant output than you think. And that is really what I'm trying to get at in the guides in this book, is to share what some of those high leverage systems are, where you can do the one small thing in your relationships that has a pretty dramatic impact. Like, in your romantic relationship, I have this idea in the book of the life dinner, like a once a month thing. When life gets chaotic, you're not going to have time every day to talk about the bigger picture things in your relationship. So take the once a month chance to go really deep. It's like a small time investment that has an outsized impact in your life. There's a bunch of things like that in the book that are plays on that exact same principle, that anything above 0 compounds. And if you can make that anything that you are doing something high leverage, it's going to compound really well in your life.
I love the example you use to bring this to life in the book of Lionel Messi being lazy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Lionel Messi, for those who don't know, most famous soccer player in the world, arguably the best player of all time, widely considered to be lazy. If you go search Lionel Messi lazy on Google, you'll get 500,000 hits. He has probably the most talked about walking habit in the world. He constantly walks around the field. If you watch any of his games, actually, if you would watch the World Cup final when they won the World Cup, he was walking around in the 107th minute of the most important match of his life. Everyone else is feverishly sprinting around the field, and he's just kind of moseying around, looking around. And people call him lazy for that. But it's not laziness, it's strategy. He's creating a map of the field. He's creating space. He's conserving energy. And then in the exact right moment, when it really matters, he deploys all of his energy into the perfect angle to go and get the ball and score. We all need to live a little bit more like that in our lives. That is the definition of high leverage. He is deploying all of his energy and attention into one specific moment in the perfectly right way. And that's what allows him to thrive as an athlete and on the field. And we can all implement that same principle into how we live our lives.
Like being an essentialist.
Yeah, it's removing a lot of the fluff. It's saying no to a lot more things. And it's really honing in on the few things that actually move the needle in your life.
Yeah. That is the perfect transition into the last framework. And this could possibly be the most life-changing. I know I said the first one was, but the whole thing was life-changing. But we both live by the guiding philosophy of memento mori, which was also in your book. We both had it tatted on us.
You do live by it, man.
I have it here. It's covered.
I love that.
Jacket. So that's why this one really spoke to us. It's this concept of making a list of your front row people. this to me was such a high leverage system for this concept of the social wealth and those relationships that are so important. In your own words, what is this one really all about?
Front row people is part of this visualization that I walk you through to close your eyes and imagine you are at your own funeral. You're dead. People are walking in, hugging each other, crying, and then they all sit down and look at who is sitting in the front row. Look at their faces. Think about those people. Those are the people that truly matter in your life. And that should instill an awareness in you of whether you are truly cherishing those people that hold that special place in your world, whether you are showing up for them, whether you are investing in those relationships in the way you should, and whether you are being that front row person to someone else in your life. That raises a very important point about investing in relationships as your most precious investment that you can make. That is not a mindset that most people have. We know to invest in the financial wealth. We know to invest in the S&P 500, put money away, do those things. Investments in your relationships compound better than any other investment in the world. And if you don't invest in those relationships, they won't be there. Life is filled with laters. You say, I'll spend more time with my kids later. I'll spend time with my wife later. I'll focus on my health later. I'll, find my purpose later. Do all these things later. The sad thing is that later just becomes another word for never, because those things are not going to exist in the same way later, especially when it comes to relationships. Your kids are not going to be 5 years old later. Your wife won't be there for you later if you're not there for her now. Your friends, those old friends that you've loved getting together with, that you had such amazing memories with, they are not going to be there later if you don't take the time to invest in those relationships now. You need to be the catalyst. Make sure that you're just doing the annual trip with the guys. Send the text to the old friend when you were thinking about them, when you have a fun memory. Get together for coffee with that person that you really like. Just do the tiny daily investment, and those things will thrive into your old age. And we know scientifically that the strength of your relationships is the single most important factor for your health and happiness. The Harvard study of adult development, they tracked the lives of 2,000 people over the course of 85 plus years, and they found
him on our podcast. We're excited to talk to him.
Yeah, he wrote one of the blurbs for this book. He's a dear friend. He's incredible. You guys will have an amazing conversation with him. Dr. Waldinger, incredible human being too. And they found that the single greatest predictor of health at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. He will say this much more articulately than I ever can. But what more reason do you need to recognize that the relationships are what matter? Relationships. So invest in that, and the rest of the things fall into place.
Yeah. And it seems like you really live by that principle, because in the dedication of your book, you write, "For my wife Elizabeth and my son Roman, with the two of you by my side, I always feel like the wealthiest man alive." So our final question for you, and we're about to go deep here, is hopefully many, many, many years from now, when your family has gathered to celebrate your life and Roman is standing near your casket and about to deliver your eulogy, what do you hope Roman says about the way his dad lived his life?
You are going deep. I would hope that he would say that I tried my best. Not that I always did my best or that I was the best, but that I tried my best at everything that I did. That's all that I can really hope for, that I just give my all to the different things that I'm doing, to the different people, the missions that I'm on. I would be thrilled if he felt that way.
I got no doubt that he will say that just by watching the way you walk, man. So thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing this wisdom with the world. And this was just the tip of the iceberg of what's in this book. So for everyone out there watching, listening, go pick it up, The 5 Types of Wealth. It will literally change your life. Thank you, brother, for sharing your wisdom.
Love you. Thank you, guys.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end.
If you like this episode of BSU, you'll probably also like this one right here. So give it a click. Yeah, just click it. All right. See you next time.
Peace.